And at the last minute, I hit record. And that's one thing a good podcaster always wants to do is remember to press the record button. Hey, Matt, how you doing?
Good, John. That's yeah, exactly. Yeah, you caught yourself perfect timing there. I love the intro. I love what you got going on here, and real pleasure to meet you.
Good to have you here. So, for those of you who have joined us here on YouTube, this is Beyond Belief Sobriety. We are a podcast and community of people who are seeking or who have found a secular path to recovery from addictions of all kinds. And today, Matt Gardiner is my guest. He is a recovery coach. He is a sound therapist from Edmonton, Canada. He's also the host of the Beyond Recovery podcast, and he's recently launched a program called Recovery Roadmap, which has a 30, 90, and 365-day options that you can learn more about at his website, recoveryroadmap.me. So I'm really excited about learning about you and what you've got going on, Matt. One thing I always do here is try to get to know somebody through their recovery story. I wonder if you can start by giving us a little bit of background about yourself and how you got into recovery and what you think recovery is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Great place to start. And again, thank you for the opportunity today. Yeah, so for my, I'll go right back to the beginning. The earliest memory that I have with alcohol and what ended up being a fascination with alcohol was at very, very early age. My dad was always a big drinker. And on my mom's side, my uncle Paul, so that was my mom's brother, a big drinker as well. So I remember whenever they would get together, they would just be in the adulting room, and 5-year-old Matt is hearing this, like everything in that room all of a sudden would start getting louder. The music starts getting louder. They're yelling at each other, but they're laughing too. So they aren't angry. So I was very curious as to what the heck is going on over there. So I would go in and it would be the usual, "Hey, Matt, come over here for a minute. We want you to try something," right? And have a little bit sip of dad's beer or whatever, harmless. Maybe not harmless, but you know what I mean? It wasn't like I was slamming beers at 5, but had a little sip. And it was enough to get the bitter beer face and, "Yeah, gross. How do you drink that?" And they laugh and they go, "Yeah, one day you'll, appreciate the taste," blah, blah, signs of things to come, I guess. Right.
Yeah.
So that was my earliest memories, and add some humor to it. Right. Because on one hand, it can be viewed as somewhat dark, but on the other hand, it's somewhat comical as well.
Sure.
So which is recovery. Isn't that recovery when you really look at it? So that was my earliest memories. Fairly sheltered upbringing up until I turned 13. So my mom was a stay-at-home mom. I grew up in a fairly small center, 70,000 people, Prince George, British Columbia, Canada, sort of isolated up. It's like the northern capital of BC. And when I was 13, when my parents divorced, it was a huge like my world just blew up. I started growing up a lot quicker, and just sort of revealed that there was this background. It just felt like everything, like I'd lived in a lie growing up, essentially, right? Like I kind of knew that my parents fought every now and then, and it wasn't a perfect relationship. But every time I'd go to somebody else's house, I saw that, sort of dynamic in my friends' parents and such as well. So I didn't think too much about it. And then just to see that it had been growing behind the scenes and realizing that there had been this discontent was a shock to my system and very hurtful, as one can imagine. And that was right as I was going into high school. And high school in my city that I grew up in was grade 8 to 12. So, I was in the land of giants when I went there. I hadn't hit my growth spurt till about grade 9 or 10. So I was like 5'2", like 80 pounds probably at this point. Much bigger now. I must say I ended up going up to like 5'11" and about 150. So I had a big growth spurt. But initially in grade 8 there, it was like a small kid, stunned, just the home life being what it was, and showing up to high school and just being shy as it was. So as you can imagine, kind of a easy target for bullying. So I was exposed to that early in my high school years. At that time that I was already feeling a lot of otherwise stress. So, I was doing sports at the time because that's how I'd grown up, just a lot of physical activity. But what I found, what actually saved me, but then also got me into drinking, was I pivoted from sports into music. So I started playing in a band, and it was a great way for me to express these emotions that were coming up in me, and more like, in my view of it, was a safer, more abstract way, right? So it was kind of like instead of writing a journal, I would write a song that kind of had a veil of fiction
Mm-hmm.
on it or between it, but it was also me expressing myself. So music and art in general is great for that, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So that was great. But then I started, as a result, I grew up in the 90s. So there's like bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and then the 70s rock that
Mm-hmm.
my dad grew up in. And I also took on. So I'm reading books about Led Zeppelin, and just everything is glorified about the rock and roll lifestyle. So that's what I wanted, and that's what I got into. So that's where I got into drinking. I was drinking, I'd say pretty close to every weekend for the last couple of years of high school. Got very much into smoking weed, not quite daily, but pretty close. And honestly, that was my exposure to it, or what it did for me, quote unquote. Or so I thought. My perception
Mm-hmm.
of what it did for me was got me out of my shell. I thought I'd found. I was able to tap into the true me, right? How confused I was. But what I meant by that is like the shyness seemed to go away. I was able to talk to girls at parties. I was able to
Right.
go to parties. I was always
Right.
afraid to go to these like social gatherings, right? Because I was like, oh, just being shy, right? And I never quite felt like I was belonged to any group. I was sort of had one foot in with every group. And I have a suspicion that had to do with the bullying. I liked to try to be friendly with everybody, every group. So like the archetypes of high school, the band kids, the nerds, the jocks, the bad kids. I was kind of a chameleon, and I was able to sort of fit in with all groups, but never quite feeling like I fit in. And again, that's what really, I guess, led me to the drinking, right? Because that helped me numb out that feeling instead of actually developing it and learning how to deal with it properly without the use of a substance. So I'm fast forward a little bit. I got to 27 years old. It spiked up through my early 20s, just like daily drinking. I started crossing some lines. So John, I always had like the usual parameters that people put on drinking initially. Like I'd only drink on weekends or only after 6 p.m. And then gradually over from 20 to 27, I started like crossing the lines and
Mm-hmm.
going through those barriers and boundaries. Daily drinking, started drinking in the morning sometimes just because why not, right? I'm an adult. I
Sure.
can do what I want, right? So that's when that sort of thing crept in, and I realized that's like what my Uncle Paul's behavior was, and I was like, I can kind of see why he does this, And so anyways, when I was 27, I hospitalized myself for acute pancreatitis, which is incredibly
Oh.
painful, and 3
Oh
days in
my
the
gosh.
hospital. Yeah, so that was a big
Now, was
wake
that
up
brought on because of your
call.
drinking, or was that just
uh
a totally
yeah.
unrelated situation? Was that related to your drinking, the pancreatitis?
Sorry, I heard the last part of the question. What was the first
Was the
part?
pancreatitis related to your drinking?
It was 100% because of the drinking. Yes. Yeah, sorry, I should clarify that. Absolutely. It was
That's fine.
yeah, coming out of a big party weekend, and I thought it was just a really, yeah, it was a hangover, but it felt different. I definitely felt something inside me that was yeah, that was the cause for concern. It felt different, right? And we were out in a pretty isolated area, and luckily we got back to town by the time it fully, you know,
Mm.
found its way into my body. And I was like, okay, something's wrong here. So my girlfriend dropped me off at the hospital, and spent 6 hours in the waiting room, just keeled over, and them questioning, do I really need to be here? And I totally get it. I understand. There's like people that show up for a cold and everything, right? So,
Right.
right. So I understand that. And then finally they had to do all these tests before they could do any pain management on me. And,
Wow.
like the whole, the, what is it called? The scan of like I can't remember what it's called,
Mm-hmm.
but the, not x-ray, but something like that, where they put some gel on you and kind of,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what's going on in there? And yeah, so 3 days in the hospital, and I got out, and I was like, okay, the whole time I was just like, okay, like this is my wake up call. Please just let me get out of here, doing this whole thing. Right. And then within 24 hours of getting out, I had a beer in my hand. Now, the
Wow.
reason for that is I was like the rye drinker. So my addict brain started negotiating, and the negotiation was, well, I think it's more rye that did that to you. Now that you're like beer, it's only 5%. You can
Mm-hmm.
moderate it a lot easier. You can be a beer drinker now. And I was like, that makes sense. Right. So that's what I did. I became a beer drinker. And, by the time I was about 30, I'd finally just like, it was funny though, like thinking back, everything in my life was like, I was getting promoted at work. The band I was playing in just got a grant to record a professional album. So all these things were leveling up for me. The universe was gifting me all these things. And I, I was a hard worker, but it was like functional alcoholism, at its, a fine example of, right? And so as a result, I didn't see any issues with it. I was like, you know what? I'm showing up to work. I'm getting promoted at work. I've been playing in 3 bands or playing around the city. I get like high performing, right? In my mind. And so there was no problem. I'm not that guy, in the bag, the caricature of the dude with the bottle in a brown paper bag. That's not me. So I don't have a
Right.
problem. The denial part, right? But by the time I was 30, I realized that, I got myself into a hole that, it was really, I was depressed and having some girlfriend issues, we'll say. And so I ended up putting my hand up, and it was the first time I asked for help. And I thought I was going to be, this is a worthwhile part of the story to mention. I thought everybody was going to be disappointed in me, because I was definitely disappointed in myself. And I thought that, maybe even get fired from my job. It was really challenging for me. And I was very scared at that time. And it was like the exact opposite. Like everybody was super supportive and like saying that I'm being courageous, even though that was the exact opposite of how I felt, right? I'm like, courageous, what are you talking about? I'm like a complete screw up at this point, right? And it was a really pivotal time for me, as you can imagine. So I ended up taking 5 weeks off. And the first 2 weeks of the 5, it was a big binge, right? Just to get it out of my system. And then at that point, I was like, okay, it's now or never. I either just continue on this path, the binging, or I'm going to actually at least try to change my ways. So I ended up going to an AA meeting with a buddy of mine, who we had a falling out. He had gone to NA and AA, and we'd had a falling out over substances, of course. And so I was kind of our olive branch. I say, hey, can you take me to one of these meetings? He said, of course. And we get there, and then we're in the parking lot. And by the time I got to the parking lot, I'm like, okay, I got afraid. I'm like, okay, I think, the energy of just being near here, I'm cured. I'm good. And Brent, to his credit, just put his hand on my shoulder. He's like, it's all good. Like, this will be good. Let's go inside together. And I was like,
Cool.
okay, I'll do this. So we go in there, and it's like the exact opposite. I thought it was just going to be a bunch of like depressing people and all that, but like everybody's high-fiving Brent and hugging him. And it's like this, I was like, wow, okay, not expecting this. This can be cool. And I'll tell you, as soon as I sat down and the first guy started reading the opening, whatever, from the big book, I physically felt like a weight. It was like somebody was sitting on my shoulders, and it just removed, and I started tearing up. And there was like a 180 of like a spiritual shift inside of
Right.
me. And from there, I stayed alcohol free for a little over 3 years, like 3 years, 3 months. And another worthwhile part of the story is this is where my ego started. So I had this like really calming time in my life where I really got into like Wayne Dyer and just like how I can improve, self-improvement, believing in myself, and figuring out ways to live without alcohol. And then my ego started to creep back in and trying to micromanage my recovery and sobriety and alcohol freedness. And that's when I decided, you know what? Everything's going great in my life. Perhaps I can add alcohol back in. I've learned so much in the last 3 years. So, what's the harm in having another drink? Certainly I can drink like everybody else now. And, as you can, long story short, on this side of it anyways, the next 4 years, I tried moderation, every angle on moderation, on weekends only, no alcohol at the house, only if I go out, a certain type of alcohol only, right? All these different things, only local beer, because then at least I'm supporting local, like all these justifications that as I had gotten older and wiser, the justifications were just a little bit older and wiser, but they were still it's the same voice, right? The addict voice. And so finally, leading up to my current sobriety stint, what happened is my dad actually passed away a few days before Christmas 2018, and he's 66, which to me is tragically young for today's day and age. That's really not young. That's not old at all, right? And it was like his lifestyle had caught up to him, and he had been retired a year, right? And it was, I knew I was on that path, and I was 37 at that time. That was 2018. His festival, what would be Celebration of Life, was April 8th. 2019. And so I was driving back home. I'm in Edmonton, which is about 8 hours directly east of Prince George. And right in between Prince George and Edmonton is a beautiful Canadian Rocky Mountain town called Jasper, one of my favorite places on earth. I spent a lot of great times with my dad there, just again, because it was halfway between both where we were living And I remember driving through there and just felt completely empty. I'm driving on my way home. Came out of, it's worth noting, came out of a really rough party weekend, like, cocaine, all the beer, everything, like anything that you can imagine, the greatest hits, if you will. And so I was all strung out driving out there, being like, man, what am I doing? And it was the same thing. It was like, as I was driving through Jasper, I got so disturbed with myself and my own behavior and what I put myself into the situation. I'm here to pay respects to my dad, and I'm really okay. This is what getting the energy moving. It was really dark, really stagnant, dark energy. And I said, this is how I'm feeling, and blah, blah, blah. And by the time I'd finished that conversation, it was another one of those like real big shift moments where, I viewed, I'm like, okay, this is it. I've got this out of my system. What am I going to do with this information that my body energy is telling me? And so what I did is I coupled that like feeling of disturbed, like really disturbed. And it was a tribute to my dad. And my dad's like the lineage of my family, because my dad's dad was a big drinker. So my grandfather, my dad's dad, like all the way down the line, big family of drinkers, and I was just like, I can choose to stop this with me. And so
Right.
that's what I did. And as a result, it was, again, wasn't quite as powerful as that first AA meeting I went to, but
Hmm.
it was very profound, that I had this like shift, and the rest of the
I can
drive, I felt
understand
like a
that.
completely different person. Right. And I was definitely,
Yeah.
focused on what I'm going to do as opposed to how I'm
Yes,
feeling.
I
Okay, what am I
totally
going to
get
do with
that.
this energy? Right.
Yep, I can totally relate. There's a couple of things that you said there I can relate to. First of all, that first meeting, and I think one of the things that I noticed that surprised me as well was the levity in the room, the people that were laughing, and the hope that I got from that, because I was at the bottom of my life. I couldn't imagine anything being worse than where I was at that time. And here these people were laughing and smiling, and they shared their stories with me. And I guess through their laughter, they gave me hope, because I could see from their stories that they understood where I had come from. And yet they could laugh about it because it was something for them that was in the past. So,
Yes.
that was really, you know, they don't even do that on purpose, but man, that laughter and levity and lightness is so helpful for anybody that's in that situation. And it's what the thing that's so unique about AA or probably really any recovery group is that you might have that lightness, but at the same time there's something deeply serious that we're dealing with at the very same time. So it's very interesting. But what you said about your father's death also came hit me pretty close to home. So for me, I was sober for 10 years. So by the time I'm 35, my father died at the age of 64, and it was a very
Wow.
sudden death. So
Mm,
around the same age as you were, my father about the same age
yeah.
as your father was.
Wow.
Now, what his death did to me is it kind of woke me up to where I was in my life, realizing that I had never really pursued the dreams that I had before alcohol took those from me. I was staying sober. I had a little job. I was doing fine, but I really wasn't. I kind of had given up on what I thought I could be in life.
Mm,
After his death, that changed. And what happened with me, Matt, is I started living less of my life in the rooms of recovery and more of my life in the world. So I go to school, I get an education, I start meeting
mm,
people, I start living my life, I start setting goals, achieving goals, and it was just an amazing period of time. But it took that event, unfortunately, for me to kind of wake me up. And in my case, it was like I looked at my father's life, who I respected, and I looked at my life, and I'm like, I haven't achieved anything compared to this guy. So, so I did that. And I'm not saying that I was like in perfect mental health when I was doing this. It was kind of maddening. I was like on a rampage to get everything done in my life that I wanted done, but it was also productive. And so I understand that shift you're talking about when your father died. There's something really, I don't know, there's something very special about that, I think, when you lose your father.
yeah. Thanks for sharing that. It's pretty profound how close we were
Mm-hmm.
both our dads and our personal
Mm-hmm.
ages at the time. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. That is pretty, it's one of those like synchronistic moments, right? Yeah. Obviously we were meant to talk about this. So that's pretty
Mm-hmm.
cool. Yeah. You know what? And it's funny you mentioned it because it had a similar impact on me. And I think it's like the coupled with the fact that I had sobered up. I liken that in a lot of ways to like waking up in a sense, right? Because I had been fine with a certain level of happiness or
Exactly.
consciousness, right?
Exactly. Yep.
And to your point is like there was nothing wrong with what I was doing. In fact,
Right.
I was successful by
Right.
any marker of society's markers, right? But there was something in here that felt different after
Right.
that second time when I became alcohol free, this current one that I'm on. So, and that actually is a great segue into what unless there's something you want me to go
No,
back
go
into
for it.
is yeah. So just gonna say so by that stage, after I got about a couple of years into this alcohol free, so right before the pandemic, I would say I felt certain things were really attracting my attention. It was like the stories of people that they're betting on themselves or like underdog stories. I think everybody's a sucker for an underdog story, but like it was really emotionally like making me emotional, like starting to tear up a bit if I'd see something that would really get me. And I was like, okay, so is this telling me this is something that I need to do? And I'm like, am I on the right path here? So I had this real big, like existential crisis of like, who am I? What are my values? Are these my values or are they my parents' values? And I've just like worn them, because it's learned behavior. Have I ever fully broken off and become my own person? Or am I still sort of like, do I these attachments? So just all these questions I never asked myself again, because of, I'm,
Right.
I'm pushing that stuff down. And I can really relate to what you were saying too. I like this rampage of like yang energy of just like achiever. I just got to do this. After I achieve this, then I'll be happy. And then it
Right.
doesn't happen. And it's like, okay, well, I got to keep going. Right. And force, go, grind. And that's like glorified by the society that
It
we're in as
is. It
well. Right.
is.
So that's what I was doing. And so again, yeah, really relate to what you said. And so that was where and of course my answer was just work harder, was
Mm.
just push further, just do one more of this. And I, that's like a good level to be at, is like, instead of being like in a small story, a victim story, what's the next level up? The next level is being motivated by like, oh, I'll show you, I'm not going to be a victim. So that's kind of where I get stuck. And that's where you get that
Right.
achiever energy, or that's where I got the achiever
Right. Right.
energy. Right. So then I'm starting to kind of break through that. Okay. What's on the next side of that? And then that's kind of where like this journey I've been on the last, say, 18 months. And so what it was I ended up just taking like a 6-month sabbatical last summer because I turned 40. And so I was like, I'm having all these recurring things. I had this like dread when I wasn't at work. Right. And on my way to work, I'd have this like real big anxiety. And, I'm not generally an anxious person. Right. So I was like, okay, something is just not quite right here. So is this I'm just going to pursue this feeling. So I'm going to take some time off, which was challenging, unto itself. The only time I'd taken any time of time off was that 5 weeks I took to sober up the first time, like 10 years ago.
Wow.
So I took 6 months off under the guise that, okay, when I go back, I'll just work on some projects I've always wanted to, instead of, again, when I'm 55 and I retire, then I can do this, this, and this. I'm like, no, I'm going to do some of
Right.
those, art projects, music projects, nature walks, go visit my family more than have been these last, 15, 20 years, and things of that, and just see how that feels. And I'll tell you, I got day 2 of my 6-month sabbatical. I had one of those, like, I don't know if you ever get it, but like a voice that's beyond your inner dialogue. There's like, it's like, I always picture it as like my grandpa on my mom's side, because I really always looked up to him. And it was like, you're not going back, it said. I was like, interesting. Where did that come from? So it was like, after that, I was just like super open and just really following my intuition. I went for these big nature walks, and I would just like, had this creative outpouring of just ideas. And they were just whatever. Like, I was entrepreneurial ideas, even though I had at that time no, concept or even like desire to be an entrepreneur, but just ideas. Right. So it felt like the floodgates had opened up, and just felt great. And, I was getting all these like goosebumpy feelings of like, yeah, yes, like I'm living again. Right. And then, so about halfway through the 6-month sabbatical, I realized that, I don't want to go back, but I'm running out of resources, specifically financial resources. Right. I put enough money to get through, But there are these money stories, right? I'd had this like collapsed distinction of like self-worth and money are the same, right? So like
Right.
trying to work through those and get that separate. So it was like, and then of course imposter syndrome's coming up, going like, who do you think you are? Why are you better than these people? Like, why do you get to leave? It's like weird stuff, right? And then yeah, so I ended up I isolated. Okay, what did I like about my job? And by this time, I'm assistant store manager, 12 years in upper management, right? So, and 20 plus years experience doing the same job, like from the part-time closer to assistant store manager, all points in between, meeting all these different people. I've been in like 17 different stores. So what did I like about it? Because something definitely didn't like about it, but there are things that I do like about it. So the main thing was the coaching and mentoring part.
Yeah.
And I found that rewarding. I love collaborating with people. I love reflecting back to people their strengths and helping them believe in themselves. So that's kind of what came up for me, John, is like the idea of becoming a coach, and what better way to integrate coaching is like, for me, I'm comfortable coaching with something that I have life experience in. As deep as I've gone is as comfortable as I am coaching, right? So if I haven't done the inner work on myself or been through something, I'm not going to go be like I can't even think, like an arborist coach decided to see trees outside, because I have no experience with that. You know what I mean? I can give you some like mindset tips for that, but like, so that's what led to me to the whole like sobriety coach thing. So,
Okay.
I did go back.
It's interesting the comparison between business and recovery coaching. I actually had an interview with someone who got into recovery coaching, who was actually he would coach like big shot executives at all these companies and everything. He was an executive coach, I guess. And he was also a person in recovery, and he could see the similarities, that there was really no difference between helping someone find motivation to achieve their recovery goals as there was with helping somebody, find the motivation to achieve their career goals. And so in talking to him, I could see that. And then later I took coursework here about to become a peer support specialist. And in that, it talks about, they teach you about how to motivate people to achieve their goals and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, wow, this is like what they taught me at work to do as a manager.
Right.
So similar.
It is. Yeah. Again, I'm really enjoying talking with you, because your summaries are great to bring on the next subject. And yeah, we're very much on the same page that way. 100%, because there is. And that's what the beautiful part about coaching is, like the certifications that I've taken. Yes, I've done a recovery coach certification, but the actual coaching certification that I took is called Enlifted, and I'm level 2 for that. And it's all about it. You can apply that literally to any genre in a lot of ways. It is that mindset coaching. And yeah, you're right. There is so many similarities, because with recovery and sobriety, you're going to be, faced with, limiting beliefs about yourself. There is going to be that like self-doubt that you have to work through. There's going to be like shame and, some of these like more stagnant emotions that can be challenging, that it's nice to just have somebody that can encourage you to work through them. Right. So absolutely. Yeah. There's tons of parallels, between pretty much any genre. And then, using this coaching style with that. So, and then just the fact that I have my own personal experience to dip into and go, hey, just a story that may, resonate with you. This is how I dealt with this. Not saying that that's advice or you have to do it that way, but I've been through that. So as a result, I can really empathize and resonate with somebody on a very deep level, because of what I've gone through in my life experience.
Well, I really like the trend of peer specialists working with treatment teams. I like the trend of recovery coaches. The thing about it that's so helpful, there's a couple of things, but one of the things that you mentioned is you asked yourself what your values are. What do you value in your life? And I never asked myself that when I stopped drinking.
Oh,
and,
interesting.
During that time when I was drinking, I never lived up to my values. And when I stopped drinking, I never asked myself that question. Well, what do I really value? What do I want out of my sobriety? What is recovery going to be? And I think that's where a coach comes in handy, because it helps you. It would help a person understand that, okay, yes, my life is a mess. I've been drinking, but who am I? Who do I want to be?
Yes.
What goals do I want out of my recovery? And I think that's what a coach will help a person discover and help them, break any obstacles that get in their way of getting to where they want to be, or that person wants to be.
100%. Great. Yeah. Great comments. So yeah, absolutely. One of the first things that I do, even on the discovery call, is, speaking of core values, beliefs,
Oh
and because
man.
let's face it, they're going to change quite
Yeah.
drastically once you become alcohol free. From mine before, I might have said they were one thing, but man, I was
Right.
not being congruent with them
No,
whatsoever.
no.
Right? There was a lot of like, if I really looked at it, there was
I know.
probably a lot of like getting over on people, lying so I could drink in
Yeah.
secret, right? So coming out of that, absolutely. That's step one. And I love that you said that. Step two for me is really addressing where you are stuck. I don't want to get into goal
Ah,
setting per se until we address
that's
perhaps the
good.
why, right? Why were you
Yeah.
drinking in the first place? Dealing with some really traumatic stories, airing them out,
Uh-huh.
reframing them. And then from there, taking that stuck energy after it's been aired out by the law of conservation of energy, that energy is still there. So it's got to go somewhere. So what are we
Ah,
going to do with that? Now it's time to set some goals. I don't want to necessarily set any goals until we have that, that
that makes
stuck
sense.
energy addressed, the
That
dark
makes absolute
energy, right?
sense. Otherwise, it'd be
Yeah.
really frustrating if you haven't.
100%.
Hmm.
100%. Yeah, exactly. No, I love it, man. I'm really enjoying this conversation. Yeah.
So anyway, that's how you got into recovery coaching,
Yeah.
and you're doing that now. Sounds like you're doing pretty well with that, and that's looking forward to seeing how that develops. But along with that, is this when you got into sound therapy? And can you tell me what sound therapy is?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. So, yeah, exactly. So, I'd say, okay, so I went back to work for 4 months quickly just to, you know what? See, initially I was going to do some overlap between my previous career and this coaching career. And then I found that everything that I'd done over the last 6 months to try and integrate it into my old world was very, very challenging. It was like the new Matt, with the best intentions, trying to like shoehorn back into this old, and it wasn't going to work. So I ended up pulling the plug this past January, the end of January, and just doing full time on the coaching. So part of the coaching was realizing, okay, I've been a musician my whole life. So that's been, 20 plus years of performing in indie rock band, right? And again, I mentioned the growing up in child of the 90s, really like in these darker bands, right? Like the
Right.
subject matter, when I'm an angry 25-year-old, it was great. I'm not angry
Right.
anymore. I'm trying not to be angry. Don't get me wrong, I'm not perfect, but so I started, and we were kind of talking about before we started this show here, our changes of musical taste as we've grown up. And so I found that I was very much listening to what would be called like more new age music, like
Hmm.
meditation
Hmm.
music, guided breath work, like the Wim Hof music
Hmm.
his breath work is amazing. Instrumental, right? So when I'm working at home and developing
Hmm.
different things for my course, a lot of instrumental, like classical. So,
Hmm.
longer form music without words, other
Hmm.
than if it was guided meditation. So I'm like, okay, well, certainly with my musical, prowess, for lack of a better term, I can pivot into doing what's called this like sound therapy or sound healing. So I'll give a little, without getting too far in the weeds, I'll try and give like an overview of what it is. So the way that what I focus on is so there's different are you familiar with like the energy centers of the body, like the chakras? Have you
I've heard of them, but I'm not that
okay?
familiar with them.
Okay, and and just in case I like, some people might not be
Right.
super into this, I'll just give a brief overview. So there's
Okay.
7 energy centers, and it's very like tied into like yoga and such
Right.
things like that. It's easy to look up if this is interesting to anybody. There, you can go down the whole rabbit hole, but I'll give you the basics. So 7 different energy centers, like starting from your root, there'll be sacral, solar plexus, heart, throat, third eye, and then your crown chakra. So you have 7 energy centers, and the idea is each energy center has I got a fly in here, has like a frequency, a specific whole tone frequency. So it would sound like a boo. That's like the whole tone, right? And that will actually resonate with whatever, like, whatever, say if it's the heart chakra, you find the particular frequency that will resonate with that. And what's going to do is just like, if you're just doing some breathing on it, you could listen to just the whole tone itself. And it's gets a little bit boring, a little bit grating just to hear like the whole time, but it is very effective. And
Hmm.
528 hertz specifically, which is the solar plexus
Interesting.
chakra, is amazing. Like it's actually got a lot of scientific for what it does to the vibrations of the human body, as your listeners and yourself probably know, like we are like vibratory beings, right? Like the DNA,
Mm-hmm.
everything in our body
Mm-hmm.
is vibrating. So if you can pick this certain frequency that's been known to resonate with that energy center, it can help with healing if there's like a blockage there, so each energy center will have, say, for example, if you are like, for me, I was doing a lot of people pleasing, right? Growing up, that was just a pattern. As I had mentioned, the chameleon side of like socializing, learning how to socialize in high school. So as a result, I felt very sort of top heavy, right? I was always like meeting people and harmonizing with them and trying to like match their energy. So I wasn't very rooted necessarily. So my root chakra would be one that I would target. So, finding like it's 396 hertz. So that's like, it just happens to be a tone. That would be, and then so the tone actually represents a note on the piano. So
Oh.
396 hertz, if the piano is tuned, yeah, I won't go too nerdy about this, but so the note is G, for example, on the piano. So you hit G, that is the same as the 396 hertz. So then, knowing that it's in the key of G, I can compose a musical arrangement over that
Oh.
whole tone. So the whole tone's in the background. So it's got that healing frequency, but that's layered over top. Over top, I'll have some like nature sounds. I'll have some like
Oh.
piano or some
Mm-hmm.
guitar, and just make it nice and relaxing and a little bit easier and more digestible to the ears than just hearing a for 20 minutes, right? So that's the whole idea. And yeah, from there you can do, I have a breathwork certification as well. It's very simple, and it's like I incorporate that into it as well, where you do a guided breathwork track over some of this, like these like the sound healing with the frequency and the composition that I do over top of that. Like I say, adding nature sounds is just a natural relaxing modality
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
listeners as well. So yeah, it's just, I do have a lot of interest and experience in audio engineering and putting together music from being in a rock band. So it was just a real natural, easy transition for me to get into sound therapy. And using that with my clients as well has been just another dimension of, what I can bring to, say, a coaching call, right? And we usually do a little bit of breath work to start a call, right? Just so we can both kind of like, just lower, say if somebody's joining me right after they just got off work or something, they're kind of I'm like, okay, well, let's do like 3 minutes of the resonant frequency breathing, and I'll play some of the sound therapy and we'll breathe together. And then it just feels like we're kind of getting on the same page, right? Like, just so we're both kind of drop into it. And okay, so now your blood pressure's down, we're relaxed. Okay, let's talk about what's going on. Then we'll verbally check in, right? So it's just a matter of getting that energy just more relaxed, and you're breathing better. Because a lot of times, people have that breath sort of trapped up in their chest, right? Myself included. Unless I'm really aware of my breath, my breathing patterns, I do a lot of chest breathing. Again, getting back to like that energy of what we're talking about, the achiever energy basically puts you in this like mild stress response where
Right.
you're just like, okay, what's next? All right, it's like this is anxiety and stress to make
Right.
and that's what fuels this achiever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So getting out of that, having some nice big abdomen breaths, getting back into the parasympathetic nervous system, right? And then from that space, okay, let's talk. Let's do a check-in. How are you feeling today? Let's talk
Wow.
about, emotional quality, right? And for me, I feel very confident with it, having these
Yeah.
tools, because at that point, like it's doing so much work for me. It's been very effective. So
Sounds super interesting.
yeah.
I love music, and I've been using music here recently just to help me relax. Actually, I use it at work. I work from home, so I
Yeah.
listen to some jazz music that's playing lightly in the background. Kind of helps me relax and focus, and not worry about what's going on in the world. And I remember one night, it's probably like 4 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning or some damn thing, and I'm on YouTube, and for some reason the algorithm was leading me to music that will help you sleep or sounds that will help you sleep, and be nature sounds and all this kind of stuff. So I see real value in that. But obviously I think I would get more out of it with someone who knows what they're doing, and actually has some sounds out there that could be used. I'll definitely check that out. I think that would be very valuable, and
Yeah.
especially to get you kind of calmed down before you can kind of really realize, okay, what do I want to deal with right now anyway?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's huge, huge for me. And I'll send you some links and just if you wanted to check
Okay.
out the work that I've done and see if it resonates with you. But yeah, that's absolutely the thing, right? It's like as I call it like tuning in, right? Tuning into
Hmm.
each other, tuning into just this, okay, it's instead of there's enough like mental chatter as it is. So to be able to
Hmm.
just sort of encourage the person to drop into like, okay, how you're feeling, like into like that space of like a body scan. How am I
Hmm.
actually doing today? Instead of like somebody asking you how you're doing, you just say the usual, oh, good. Like, no, how are you actually doing? Like, where are your emotions right now? Like, what would that emotion be saying to you? And by doing that, like the sound therapy and the breath work right off the bat, it really opens that up and gets that dialogue a lot more authentic, I find, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, and yeah, so that's what it's all about at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. So tell me about the recovery roadmap. If you can give us an overview of that and how you had come up with it and what you do
Sure.
with it.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. So yeah, it's a program I've created, like an online sobriety, accountability, recovery program. We'll call it, so the all in one, I suppose. Yeah. So initially I had done a course on why like creative, basically like an art therapy
Uh-huh.
course, why it's so important and why it's a big part of like a health and wellness regime. Like we're always talking about like like nutrition and exercise, and I always thought that, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, how important music was in music therapy, especially when I was a teenager, and as far as expressing things inside of me that I otherwise had a hard time articulating. So having a course I had designed initially to do that, and then realizing, okay, now I know how to do the video editing. It was like this whole like learning curve that I had gone through, a bunch of stuff I had never done before, laying out a course, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, okay, well, there doesn't seem to be too many like recovery courses, right? That I had seen anyways. So I took that knowledge and know-how and then just took it into, okay, well, maybe I'll make an online, 30-day recovery course where each module is based on, a different part of like your hero's journey through
Right.
sobriety or recovery, right? So the initial, it's kind of like, I call it the sobriety toolkit, where you go, okay, talking about relapses, talking about managing withdrawals, talking about, the questions that come up in your head, like, oh, I can never drink again. Like just reframing and just that initial awkwardity of that first 30 days of sobriety or recovery. The next module is kind of like looking inwards, right? Checking out your ego. Okay, what is your relationship with your ego? Things like that nature. And then module 3 is like inner dialogue upgrades. So like, what kind of words, what is your inner dialogue? How do you speak to yourself? How do you speak to other people? Are you in like a victim story? Like getting into that sort of thing, right? And progressing as you go, and then getting into a lot of more physical and yet spiritual things, like introducing like Tai Chi and
Hmm.
yin yoga, and just the breath work and just low impact stuff that anybody can do. You don't need a bunch of expensive exercise gear or anything like that, right? And just getting the body, mind, spirit all aligned, and really having a look at yourself. And then by the end, it's like, okay, I know all this stuff, so how can I integrate this into my everyday life? So I view it as sort of like the hero's journey through
Mm-hmm.
that initial stage of recovery, the first 30 days. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I did. I did a dry July challenge. That was the first group I had run, so a couple months
Oh.
ago, and it was 6 people that went through, amazing people. And so there was people that were like early sobriety too. I had a gentleman that was 31 years in, and just
Mm-hmm.
something different, right? It's like 31 years of doing this routine, and he liked the it kind of like a little pattern disruption, right? Like, okay,
Right.
well, I haven't done a 30-day challenge in forever. Like, I'm going to do it. So he did, and he enjoyed it. He got a lot out of it as well, and it was cool. So basically what we do is we got a weekly group call
Hmm.
that's based on like the content of the week, the module that they were working on. There's 2 one-on-one coaching calls with me throughout. They can pick whatever times work for them whenever something's coming up. We do a Sunday activity day, which is like I mentioned, the yin yoga. There was a sound journey that I did, and it's a live call where we have like either a guest, yoga instructor, somebody comes on
Wow.
and leads us through it, right? So really cool that way. And then of course the course, as I mentioned, Also, what? Oh yeah, so we have a private Facebook group where everybody does daily check-in, and that all that is like it's just a awareness exercise. So you go, hey,
Yeah.
I'm Matt. I'm feeling this today. Body scan wise, I feel a little bit tense in my stomach. I had a whatever altercation at work last night. I'm still processing it. Just an idea of like getting comfortable about being
Yeah.
vulnerable in front of the camera, sharing it with other people, commenting on each other's. And that went actually really well. Everybody was like super committed
Great.
to that. And we had some really great interactions and dialogue. Nobody knew each other beforehand. And
Mm,
safe to say they're all quite good friends now. And it's really
great.
cool to see. So just that community part. And then the
Yeah.
final component of the 30-day challenge was picking so 3 things. So you have a body, mind, spirit, as I mentioned. So for example, for me, I did body. I did and it's 10 minutes. So a 30-minute commitment. So 10 minutes for each subject. So 10 minutes of running I did,
Oh, wow.
10 minutes of meditation, and then 10 minutes of reading out loud. So that was my body, mind, spirit. And you do
Wow.
that. And then you usually do your check-in. So it's just, it's just like this 30-day challenge to also do something that starts giving you that like light bulb moment of things beyond your recovery or sobriety, and challenging you
Right.
to pick up something that you've been meaning to do but haven't done yet. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just a wonderful experience, and it's really immersive, as you can imagine, because there is a daily accountable. You have to do your check-in, you have to do your 30 thrive 30. There's a video to watch, and so it's not too much where it's just like this is like a lot. You can easily integrate it into your everyday
Right.
life, right? And by the same token, it was it was really cool. By the end, I felt like it was very much a team, like a very very cool experience. I actually kind of missed. I think we all had chimed in, in the week afterwards, like, I kind of miss doing the check-ins. Like you get used to it. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's the recovery roadmap in a nutshell.
Okay. So now let's go into your podcast. And can you
Yes.
tell me about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. So Beyond Recovery, and I'll have you on. I'd love to have you
Okay.
on as a
Awesome.
guest. And yeah, so I started that back in April as well, when I had committed to doing the recovery coaching. So that was my first. I had done podcasting for years beforehand, but it
Hmm.
was like music podcasts, different other ones. So this was the first time I had done the recovery podcast. So, and that's what it was. So I've just basically, man, Instagram has an amazing sobriety
I have still
community.
not gotten into Instagram. I
Oh,
do have an Instagram
okay.
account, but I don't know quite what to do with it. I
Okay.
post pictures on there
Yeah, yeah.
of my
Fair enough.
podcast episodes.
Yeah. Hey, that works. That works. If you just go in the search engine and just type in like sober,
Uh-huh.
it's like there's like thousands of people in there that are all living
Okay.
that proud, loud and proud, recovering out loud, all that
Hmm.
stuff, right? So it's been amazing, and I've met some tremendous people. Everybody that went through that course, the Dry July, was from Instagram.
Okay.
And I've just met some great people, and it's really cool
Wow.
to watch everybody do it. So that's basically my entire podcast has come from like being on Instagram, to be honest, and just meeting people.
Isn't
And
that interesting? Yeah.
yeah, it
The
is.
podcast, podcasting, recovery podcasting, I have found is a great way to have a community, or to do something with a community you might already have. So for me, I had a kind of a similar experience. So I was involved in kind of this group that we were all atheists, and we were in AA, and we didn't like the way that a lot of the AA stuff was. So we all kind of got together and we kind of put together this like secular way of dealing with AA. And so I had this little core group that was online. We were all connecting online. And so I did a podcast, and these people were my first listeners, and they're still following me to this day,
That's
so.
amazing.
And then over time, I thought, okay, I want this podcast to be a community too. So I do a lot of what you're doing. A Facebook group. I have like one-on-one meetings like you do. And I also have like a Tuesday night meeting for listeners, where we will either have a guest from a previous episode on, or we will play a past episode and use that as a basis of discussion. But I find that the podcast and the community and the recovery all go together really, really well.
Oh, they sure do. Yeah, absolutely. And I can see, from the previous podcasting that I had done, like the music podcast and all that, very clicky, as is a lot of
Yes.
the music scenes. Whereas the recovery thing, it's so everybody's so giving, right? And it's
Yes,
just,
yes.
I can be on your show and you're not going to be like, hey, don't talk about this because that's going
Yeah,
to
there's
take, you
no
know what I mean?
competition.
Right. In fact, it's like the exact opposite, which is a
Exactly,
beautiful
yeah.
thing. Everybody's
Yeah,
supporting each other,
yeah.
and everybody's so giving. And man, the stories of people with recovery, always so vulnerable, so
Mhm,
authentic,
mhm.
right? And so it's just wonderful. Yeah, I'd love to hear what you're doing there as well. That's super cool. And yeah, it's just for me, it added a whole nother dimension and layer to my own recovery and sobriety because now I've put it out there. Before I was
Yeah.
I was secretive about who I told because there was still a bit of
Mhm,
shame. And when I
mhm.
was working my old job, I didn't want to get it out there because I just felt like there'd be so much gossip. And I guess for whatever reason, there was part of me is that's a projection on my point. Of
Right.
course,
No,
it's
I get it. It took me a long
so
time before I was wanted to do that, to put myself out there. And I
right.
noticed you have a really nice YouTube channel too. So you're out
Yeah,
there
yeah.
publicly and
I am, yeah. That's it. No going back now. No, not that I would either. And, I'm quite happy with it. And it was very freeing because before
yeah.
I felt like there was two me's, right? There's like
Yes.
the true
Yes.
me, and then there's like the work persona that I'm like, I'm
Right.
not saying my full truth and all that. You
Yeah,
always hear about
same
people saying
here. Same
yeah.
here.
So yeah, you can relate.
And
Yeah.
I haven't quite bridged that completely, but I'm making little
Mm.
baby steps,
Yeah. There you
but
go.
I like having myself out there. There I am on YouTube. Anyone who wants to Google me can find me, and so be it. I'm okay with that. But it took me a while to get there, but I'm not quite at the point where I'm that open in the workplace at large. I am with a select group of people at work, but not at large. And the company I work for is a huge company, and they do encourage people with various walks of life to kind of share their stories,
Cool.
so that we can appreciate the diversity of the um, pool of employees that we have. I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah.
diversity, and I have yet to see anybody in recovery come up. And I've often thought, well, maybe I could write something for the group internet and about recovery. And I always think about September being the time to do that because it's the recovery
Yeah.
month, and of course I never do
Exactly.
it, but it's always in the back of my mind. Who knows what I'll do one of these
Yeah.
days?
Yeah.
But it would
Exactly.
be that I like the idea though that so many people are more open about their recovery because the thing is, it's bad enough that there's a stigma about being an addict or an alcoholic, but if there's a stigma about being in recovery, that has got to be unacceptable.
Right.
And I felt like stigmatized simply because I was a person in recovery, and that's not no, that's not healthy. And that's what I think the good thing is about more people coming out about their recovery is it's like this is good. This is
Yes.
good to be in recovery. This is basically what people, any human being who's alive should be doing, is growing and changing throughout their life. That's what we do in recovery.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And you think of like, if I think of any other form of recovery, like a sports athlete coming, they're not going to be like, well, this guy's like coming back from a leg injury,
I
like
know,
get
I
away from, you
know.
know what I mean? It's like so ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's the obvious one. But even somebody that's recovering from like cancer treatment, you're not going to
Yeah.
ostracize them. Look at him. He's
No.
bald. He had chemo. Wouldn't he? You know what I mean? Like
No.
it's just nonsense. So, I totally
Yeah.
agree with you. It's like,
Yeah.
when you compare it to anything else, like, why, yeah, for sure. No, I agree with you on that one.
So, any final thoughts as we wrap things up?
Yeah, you know what? It's worth mentioning because it is a theme on both sides of yours and myself. The most important thing, if anybody's listening to this, that's kind of sober curious or having issues with it or just kind of having some relapses or blips along the way, connection is by my estimation the most important thing here. It's when I isolated myself, that's when I'd get myself into problems. When I felt separate from everybody, that's when I had problems. When I felt that I had to drink in private or I couldn't say my story, that's when I would go down that road and attract more of that energy. So if you can get yourself out there, and even an online community, as we mentioned, John, you have yours, I have mine as well. There's Instagram, there's even Reddit. If you want to be super,
Yes.
anonymous, and
Reddit's
just have
actually
like a Reddit
pretty
character,
good
but
for that.
still just get your stuff out there. There's a wonderful sobriety community on there. Just get connected and realize you hit the nail on the head when you said, when you're in a room and you can have this like shameful story and share it, and then it's reflected back to you with some laughter and be like, hey, that was my Tuesday morning, don't worry about it. And you go, oh, and then the shame just gets into laughter, and you can dissolve that shame and convert it into like a release, whether it's crying or laughing. It's amazing. And you're only gonna, I dare say, you're only going to get that from a connection, a community connection. So that's my final piece of advice.
I love it. Well, thank you, Matt. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'll be sure to post links to your website and all of your social media on your Linktree page, is where people can find out every way to get a hold of you. So thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, John. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation today. Thank you.